The aftermath of Pope Leo XIV's election on May 8, 2025 was filled with an unexpected stillness. Unlike what you might imagine, the fanfare, the bustling crowds, the grand proclamations, this new pope brought a sense of calm rather than chaos. Sure, the Vatican was buzzing with media and eager crowds waiting for his first blessing, but those who worked closest with him quickly picked up on something unique about his presence. He wasn't one to fill the air with words. Instead, Leo preferred to listen, often posing questions that left many taken aback. About 10 days into his papacy, he spontaneously began a nightly ritual that caught everyone off guard. It was a bit like he was carving out his own space in a defined world. On May 18th, it was after midnight when the routine of the papal apartment seemed to lull into a tranquil quiet. The Swiss guards assumed Pope Leo had turned in for the night, and all was as it should be. But then, at 12:41 a.m., something remarkable happened. The door to his quarters opened softly, revealing the Holy Father stepping out alone, just a cassock and a rosary draped over one hand. He offered a gentle assurance to the guard, saying, "Only a few minutes, no need to follow." With deliberate calmness, he made his way down the corridor of the second loggia. The long arched hallway looked out over St. Peter's Square, lit softly by the glow of lamps. Outside, the square was deserted, glistening with a light drizzle that made the stones sparkle like glass. The silence was profound, punctuated occasionally by the distant sound of shutters rattling or water trickling through ancient pipes. As he paused at the second window on the left, a spot he'd come to favor, he found a view that had remained unchanged since Bernini's time. From there, the dome of the basilica perfectly aligned with the obelisk. He stood still, breathing softly, a picture of serenity, his hands clasped behind his back, gazing out with an air that suggested he was waiting for something. Minutes seemed to melt away as he remained there, completely absorbed in the scene outside. Unbeknownst to him, this quiet moment was captured by the discreet cameras that lined the corridors. The Swiss guard rarely examined these recordings unless something demanded attention. But during routine checks the next morning, one technician stumbled upon something extraordinary. There was Pope Leo, just as expected, standing still in the warm glow of the lights, until, in a moment that defied all logic, something impossible occurred. While the Pope remained motionless, his shadow began to move. On the polished marble floor behind him, the silhouette shifted, a clear, distinct action, not a mere play of light. It retreated backward a full step. I want to share something extraordinary that happened to me. One night, while I was standing at my window, something remarkable occurred with my shadow. It knelt down. Yes, you heard me right. It didn't flicker or fade. It moved with such clarity, as if it were bowing to something beyond my vision. It lingered there, kneeling, for about 6 seconds before rising up and taking its place beneath me once more. I remained completely still during this time. Later, a technician who was monitoring the footage observed this strange event 3 more times. He was so astounded that he called in his supervisor. Before long, the head of security at the Vatican gathered the necessary people to look at the video. They scrutinized everything. No lighting issues, no tampering, no interference. Just me standing still while my shadow behaved so peculiarly. That afternoon, the security chief, with great reverence, requested to meet with me. When he entered my office, he had those printed stills from the video in hand. I was reading from the Acts of the Apostles when he carefully broke the silence. "Your Holiness, this footage was captured last night. I can't find a logical explanation for it." I examined the stills closely. There I was, frozen in time at the window, and right beside me was my shadow. Only it wasn't mirroring my stance. It was kneeling, perfectly shaped, but in a posture that wasn't mine. I could sense the gravity of what he was telling me, and I slowly looked up. "Has anyone else seen this?" I asked. "No, Your Holiness, just myself and one technician." "Good. Transfer the technician to a place that's serene, somewhere holy," I instructed. The guard nodded, and I added with a smile, "Perhaps a chapel. He's experienced something profound." "What about the footage?" he inquired. "Preserve it," I answered, without any reports or commentary. "Just keep it safe." The security chief seemed hesitant. "Do you recall anything unusual from last night? Did you feel anything?" It took me a moment to respond. I glanced past him at the tall crucifix that stood near my bookshelf. Then it hit me. "I felt breath," I finally admitted. "Not mine, not the wind, just breath on my right shoulder." He said nothing in response, but I felt the weight of his silence. I leaned in and added, "I was not alone." Later that evening, when I returned to my private quarters, something caught my eye on the floor near my desk. Just a small piece of parchment, folded and unmarked. I picked it up and turned it over, but there was no familiar handwriting, no seal, only a faded sentence. "Shadows bow when the light stands still." I stared at those words for a long while. Then, gently, I opened my breviary and tucked the note between its pages before closing it again. I didn't pray aloud. Instead, I whispered, "Then let me stand long enough for all shadows to bow." The next morning, I chose not to share the note with anyone, not even with my personal secretary. It felt personal, too sacred to speak of. I remember that day vividly. It started off like any other, with the usual routine of appointments. I saw a bishop visiting from Colombia, blessed a group of French seminarians, and shared a private message with a delegation from the Philippines. But throughout all of this, there was a thought that kept surfacing in the back of my mind. Shadows bow when the light stands still. By late afternoon, I found myself wanting to explore something unusual. I asked for access to the Vatican Mosaic Studio. It's a place not many visit frequently, but it has a long history of restoring the stunning mosaics in St. Peter's. I had a keen interest in checking out the recent repairs in a specific corridor, the very one where I had encountered that peculiar shadow the night before. When I mentioned my request to the chief mosaicist, he looked puzzled. The corridor I was referring to didn't have any decorative features needing attention, but I insisted, and we agreed to meet there shortly before closing time. Walking down the corridor, I took my time, studying the marble walls, the soft glow from the light fixtures, and the gaps between the windows. Halfway down, I paused and noticed a certain spot that seemed to attract my attention. "Was there ever anything mounted here?" I asked. The mosaicist examined the area, running his fingers over the smooth plaster. "No, Holy Father," he replied. But I could sense something. When I pressed against the wall, a hollow sound echoed back. "Bring me the archivist responsible for internal renovations," I instructed quietly. Within 20 minutes, a short, red-faced man named Doi Chim entered, nervously clutching a stack of binders. He introduced himself, bowing his head. I pointed toward the wall again. "Was anything ever removed from this space?" Doe glanced at his records and started flipping through one from 2009 to 2013. Yes, there was a decorative bronze wall fixture, a lantern, removed during Benedict XVI's papacy for safety reasons. Was there anything behind it? I inquired further. Just some wiring, I believe, he replied cautiously. When I pressed for who ordered its removal, there was a moment of hesitation. Let me check, he murmured, flipping through the pages quickly. His eyes widened slightly. It wasn't Benedict himself. The record shows it was moved under a maintenance directive signed by Cardinal Ratzinger. I studied him closely. He wasn't Pope then, was he? No, Holy Father, he confirmed. This entry is from 2003. Ratzinger was the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith at that time. The unearthing of this detail sent chills down my spine as the pieces of the puzzle began to unfold before me. It had been a strange day at the Vatican. Urgency hung in the air. Simony, a fellow cleric, was shaking his head as he read through some directives. There was a handwritten note in the margin, and Simony urged me to take a look. Squinting at the message, I saw the words, "Too close to the hinge, remove it before the weight is triggered." A hinge? I took a step back from the wall, bewildered. I looked for a door. Nothing. Just an expanse of smooth plaster that appeared unyielding. I felt the staff around me fade away, leaving me in solitude, my breath soft around the silence. I couldn't help but fixate on that lifeless stretch of wall. Leaning in, I found myself whispering, "Show me what I'm holding closed." Of course, nothing happened. No lights danced, no sounds echoed back. But just as I turned to leave, an odd sensation gripped me, like a taut string pulled tight across my shoulders. I paused, glancing back at the wall. It was as if something on the other side was pressing against it, sharing the weight of the moment. That night, I sought refuge in my private chapel. With a flicker of flame from a single candle, I opened my breviary. The note that had accompanied me earlier slipped free, tumbling onto my lap. I reread it, reflecting on its cryptic message. Shadows bow when the light stands still. I picked up my rosary, the beads slipping through my fingers as I prayed slowly, letting the rhythm calm me. As I reached the third mystery, the candle beside me began to flicker, not a thread of wind, for the air was still. It flickered toward me, and that's when I noticed something unusual. On the inside cover of my breviary, where the note had rested, a faint imprint had appeared. It wasn't ink or charcoal, but rather a delicate mark, glimmering like gold dust, pressed into the paper from underneath. Curiosity mixing with awe, I held the breviary to the flickering candlelight. The shape at first seemed indistinct, a mere smear. But then, as the light hit it just right, clarity emerged. It spelled a name, one not inscribed by any human hand. I recognized it instantly, though it wasn't my own. In whispered astonishment, I spoke the name aloud, and in the silence that followed, the candle's flame straightened, rising taller as if revering the weight of that name. By the time the sun rose, however, the shimmering imprint had vanished. I checked repeatedly, scrutinizing the page more carefully each time. The name was nowhere to be seen. The faint dust had disappeared. The paper looked pristine again, as if nothing unusual had ever passed between me and that wall. Yet, despite the absence of any evidence, I couldn't shake the memory of what I had seen. The name wasn't a trapdoor to the ancient world. It wasn't even in Latin or part of any biblical lore. It was the name of a bishop, Bishop Emeritus Anelmo Duarte. a man who had faded into the shadows of retirement a decade ago, remembered mainly for a brief, controversial engagement with the issue of Marian apparitions. And here I was, haunted by a fleeting glimpse into a name and a story that was anything but finished. Most of my life was spent in quietude, tucked away in Portugal. For the past few years, I truly embraced solitude. The last time anyone officially noted my presence was in 2018, when I signed a document requesting to be released from all public duties. Since then, there's been no record of me, not even a mention of my death. One day, Pope Leo XIV summoned me to his study. He had just one pressing question. "Where is Bishop Darte?" I was taken aback. "I don't think we know, Holiness," I managed to reply. "He's never been declared deceased, but the last address we had for him was a Carmelite monastery near Coimbra." The Pope's eyes narrowed with intensity as he ordered me to discreetly confirm Darte's whereabouts before sunset. Hours later, a liaison returned from the monastery, his face pale and confused. "Your Holiness, he's alive, but barely. They say he hasn't uttered a word in over a year." I was shocked to hear he lived alone in a small cell, cut off from visitors or letters. They even fed him by hand. The Pope nodded slowly, his resolve hardening. "Make preparations. I'm going there." That same evening he left the Vatican, shrouded in the cover of a pastoral retreat traveling north by unmarked car. Only I accompanied him. The road wound through the countryside, hugging the narrow path lined with eucalyptus trees and weathered stone walls, buffeted by the Atlantic winds. As we neared the monastery, dusk began to settle, painting the sky in deep shades of purple. Upon arrival, we were met with an astonished silence. No pope had ever visited this place, not even John Paul II during his pilgrimage to Fatima years before. The monks led us through the serene cloister, past serene statues of the Blessed Virgin, down a stone corridor that twisted just enough to make you feel disoriented. At the end stood an unpainted, slightly warped wooden door. "This is his room," the prior whispered softly. "He hasn't spoken since the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in 2023. My heart raced as I paused, then cautiously knocked. Silence engulfed us. Gently I turned the knob and pushed the door open. Inside, the dimly lit room contained little, a narrow cot, a crucifix, and a window barely wide enough for the last rays of sunlight to filter through. In the far corner sat a man, thin, with sunken eyes, perfectly still. But the moment I stepped inside, those eyes opened. In a voice weathered by silence, he rasped, "I told him you'd come." I froze, realization dawning on me. "You know why I'm here," I said, barely managing to keep my voice composed. A faint smile crept across Darte's lips. "No one else has ever seen it, have they?" In that moment, I had no words, but Darte nodded knowingly. "I saw the wall," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Twice. The first time." As a young priest, freshly ordained, I came across an unsettling experience during a retreat. At first, I walked past it without noticing anything peculiar, yet I could feel something watchful in the air. The second time, however, was drastically different. It was the night I decided to resign. That evening I had a vivid vision. I found myself wandering through a familiar corridor again, but this time it was transformed. The wall was cracked. Instead of speech, it emanated a strange sound, almost like something stirring to life. Beside me, Leo knelt down silently. He seemed to be searching for answers, asking me if I had ever mentioned what I experienced. I admitted that I had once written it down but ended up burning that page, filled with confessions. As I watched him study my face, I saw curiosity mixed with a somber understanding. My features were etched with years of silence and penance, yet I felt an unusual sense of calm. "Do you understand what lies beyond?" he inquired. My lips quivered as I responded, "I think it's not just about what's on the other side. It's about what might come through it." I slowly reached for the table next to my chair, pulling out a folded cloth. Inside was a wooden rosary. It looked simple, yet the crucifix at its end was extraordinary. There was no body, only the outline of Christ, as if it had been branded into the wood from deep inside. When Leo touched it, its warmth spread through him like a gentle reassurance. "I never shared my visions," I confessed, "because I feared I was losing my mind, but now I understand. It was preparation for something greater. That corridor isn't merely a passage, it's a membrane. Something is trying to push through." Leo carefully wrapped the cloth and stood, expressing his intention to return soon. I nodded in acknowledgement, and as he began to leave, I felt compelled to whisper something profound. "Your shadow didn't move because you were already on the other side." The homecoming to Rome was steeped in silence, not from secrecy but because Pope Leo XIV found himself devoid of words. The final whisper from Bishop Duarte clung to my mind like a lingering, tolling bell. "You were already on the other side." By the time we crossed the Vatican gates, the moon hung high above the dome of St. Peter's. Alone, I strolled towards the Apostolic Palace. Although Monsignor Spataro walked closely behind, the unease of my silence cast a shadow over our steps. Instead of heading to my quarters, I took a left into a corridor I had meticulously avoided for weeks, the one where shadows played tricks on light. As I entered, everything seemed as normal as one might expect. A single brass lamp warmed the space, and a soft draught whispered through the passage. The marble floor felt sturdy beneath my feet, and the faint scent of incense from the evening vespers lingered in the air. Yet, as I steeled myself and looked down, my shadow was inexplicably missing. I turned to see where it had gone, finding it inconsistently behind me, beside me, and then ahead all at once. I spun around 3 times, my mind racing, searching for that familiar silhouette that felt so wrong to be absent. The moment was surreal. I had entered the corridor feeling a strange energy in the air. Each time I shifted my weight, it felt like this corridor was somehow aware, almost like it was waiting for something. When I took a step forward, it held still, but when I took another, I felt a jolt as it shifted to the opposite direction. I paused for a minute, sensing an unusual hum around me. Not a sound, but a palpable presence that hinted I was not alone. I looked up at the painting on the wall. It portrayed the Apostle Thomas inserting his fingers into Christ's wounds. However, in a bizarre twist, Thomas was in the act of withdrawing, not touching. Just as quickly as it seemed to change, it returned to normal when I blinked. I turned and exited the corridor, my heart racing, not from fear, but from a strange sense of recognition. This corridor was more than just a passage. It felt like a veil, separating me from something observant on the other side. In the subsequent days, I fell back into my usual routine, appearing in public and meeting with various diplomatic groups. I even made a few minor appointments within the dioceses in Italy and Hungary to the College of Cardinals. On the surface, everything appeared normal, yet inside me, something was undeniably shifting. It started with my rosary. I began to reach for it, but not the ornate silver one that had been gifted to me by a previous pontiff. No, it was the humble wooden rosary given to me by Bishop Dwart, the one with the weathered figure of Christ, burned out over time. It became a nightly ritual, waking up precisely at 3:17 a.m., not by intention, but by an inexplicable compulsion. No alarm, no noise. I would find myself drawn to my study. There, by the flickering candlelight, I would kneel before my crucifix and begin to pray. Each time I did, I felt the crucifix on that wooden rosary grow warm in my hands. By the fifth night, it felt almost hot, but not painfully so, rather filled with purpose. I grasped it tightly, my heart echoing a pivotal question. Show me why you brought me here. I found myself asking not for guidance in leading the church or shepherding the faithful, but rather I needed to understand why me. Then came the sixth night, and the familiar ritual resumed. At 3:17, I knelt again and prayed, and when I completed the last decade, I glanced up at the crucifix hanging on the wall. What I saw left me bewildered. The candle beside me flickered dramatically, its flame bending outward as if something unseen had entered my space. It was at that moment that I noticed the shadow on the wall behind the crucifix. But it wasn't mine. It appeared taller and narrower. The shoulders looked different, and the head bowed slightly, not in humility but in a kind of eager anticipation. I rose, and to my astonishment, the shadow did not mirror my movements. I stepped to the left, it moved right, circling me rather than shadowing my every action. The sensation was both unsettling and electric. Out of nowhere, a shadow twisted across the marble, giving it the illusion of flowing like water for just a split second. And then, just like that, it was gone. No sound, no flash, absolutely nothing. Pope Leo XIV pressed his hand against the wall where the shadow had vanished. The marble felt cold beneath his palm, and to his shock, he discovered a fine crack there, a tiny fracture that he couldn't see but could feel, rough against his fingertips. When he pulled his hand away, he noticed something written in the dust. Only one can pass, the one who chooses not to. He stared intently at those words until the flickering candlelight blew out completely. Then, turning on his heel, he left the room, unseen until morning. The following day, a secretary stumbled upon an unusual sight. The Pope's crucifix, the large one that typically graced the wall behind his desk, had fallen, and right beneath it lay a rosary. The peculiar thing? It was still warm to the touch, yet remained unbroken, as if it had been waiting there. By the time Pope Leo returned to the room with two of his most trusted aides, the marble appeared untouched, its surface smooth and pristine. Even the crucifix had been rehung by one of his assistants, who said nothing about it. Only Leo understood what had happened. Only he felt the shadow press against him once more. Quietly, he made the decision to cancel all public appearances for the day. He locked himself inside his study and reached for a sealed envelope, one he had never opened before. It was one of two identical letters left for each new pope, handwritten by his predecessor, Pope Clement XV. The first letter was shared with the public and passed down through history, while the second was meant exclusively for the one who would follow, its label clear as day, only for the one who sits alone. He had pondered over why he waited so long to open it until that moment. As he broke the seal, his hand trembled slightly. The letter was short, barely half a page, but each word struck him with the weight of stone. If you are reading this, then the voice has already found you. It was a curious statement. He realized it didn't refer to some whisper in the night. It was about a voice that moves through silence itself, waiting for a response rather than asking questions. As he read on, he found the next line underlined. It will come when you are still. It will come when you do not move. And when it does, your shadow will move instead. He sat back slowly, taking in the ink on the page, struck by the profound truth that Clement had known, or that someone had known before him. There were only a few lines left. Your name was not chosen by the cardinals. It was known. Before the smoke ever began to rise, my own journey had already started. There's a voice that you aren't supposed to engage with. Your role is to hold it, and in time, the understanding will embrace you back. A message arrived, simply signed with the word C. I folded the letter carefully, lit a candle, and ignited it, not out of secrecy, but as an act of obedience. That night, I found myself praying alone in the crypt. Surrounded by the tombs of saints and the marble resting places of popes who had passed, I walked past the names of Leo, John Paul, and Benedict. My footsteps paused at Clement XV's tomb, where fresh flowers bloomed, and a plain white envelope lay leaning against the stone. Curiosity piqued, I picked it up only to find it unmarked, containing just a scrap of paper with a haunting message. They will never understand the silence you were chosen to endure. I had no idea who left it, but I gently returned it to its resting place and knelt before the tomb, whispering, I believe you spoke through him, so now speak through me or hold my tongue forever. As I rose, a strange sensation filled the space. Something shifted behind me. It wasn't a breeze or a draft, but an almost palpable presence. I turned around, expecting to see someone, but it was just the long, quiet corridor leading back towards the basilica. The silence enveloped me, and yet my footsteps felt accompanied, as if another pair were matching my pacing. Once again, I glanced back, but still found nothing. Exiting the crypt, I moved slowly through the bronze gates, stopping to gaze at the Pietà, Mary cradling her broken son. In the intricacies of her marble robes, I noticed an unusual shadow flicker, not my own. Frozen in place, I watched it come to a halt. The marble seemed to shimmer, catching a brief flicker of light before returning to stillness. Later, as I returned to my residence, I found something unexpected. The pages of my breviary had been opened without my touch. Turn to Psalm 39. I was drawn to the verse that read, I was silent, I would not open my mouth, for you are the one who has done this. Underneath it, ink, just slightly darker than the page, had inscribed a new message. The silence is not the absence of God. It is where He waits to be recognized. I stared at that passage for what felt like an eternity, not praying or speaking, simply closing the book and kneeling beside it. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., I awoke, not from a dream, but from a profound stillness enveloping the room. Sitting upright in bed, I turned my gaze towards the corner where the wall met the floor. It was there that I noticed my shadow, standing tall while I remained seated. I didn't feel fear. I stayed still, my eyes locked on the figure. For the first time, the shadow began to move towards me, not as a person, but as a fluid shape coalescing into a singular line. Across the stark white wall, it began to form words, crafting a sentence without a pen or hand, just the shadow effortlessly inscribing its message. I remember the moment so vividly. One night I found myself lying there, completely still, trying to listen to a voice that had always been present but was suddenly silent. It felt as if my voice had vanished, leaving me alone with my thoughts. There was a connection, almost a whisper from the darkness, and I found myself asking, "If you've always been here, why did I stop listening?" Outside, the wind brushed against the glass, creating a soothing sound. The next morning, something strange caught my aide's attention. A window in my bedroom had been left open. On the sill, there lay a single black feather. It was warm, still trembling, as if the creature that had dropped it had just taken flight. I watched that feather for 3 days, never moving it. I didn't ask the Swiss guards to check it out or my housekeeper to clean it away. I just let it sit there. Even as the chill of early May set in, it remained faintly warm. Then, by the 4th day, it simply vanished. No gusts of wind, no birds flew by to claim it. It disappeared without a trace. That's when I began to realize something I had only feared before. The voice, the presence, the stillness that had caused my shadow to shift was not something new or foreign. It was ancient. It had always been with me. Later that evening, Cardinal Stojan showed up without notice. He was the only one who'd seen the way my hands trembled, yet he never mentioned it. He was keen and observant, noticing every little detail without needing to pry. After 4 days of silence, he spoke gently. "You haven't called anyone to the balcony." I had nothing to say, I replied, feeling the weight of my own words. "And when will you speak again?" "When I know it's not just me," I admitted. He glanced at my hand and noticed I hadn't worn the fisherman's ring in weeks. "You haven't worn it since the 2nd week of Easter." I turned away from the fire, sitting on the edge of my desk. "That's because it doesn't bind me anymore." There was a deep silence between us. Reaching into the lower drawer of my desk, I pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in a piece of linen, was something unexpected. A signet ring, but it wasn't the same. It was darkened, not by age, but by fire. This was the very ring that had once disappeared from my finger, and now, weeks later, it had returned, forever changed. My fingers brushed over it, and even in the box, it still felt warm. Stojan raised his eyebrows in surprise. "It still lives," he said. I didn't respond. Instead, I examined the ring closely. Inside, engraved deeper than ever before, was a new line. "The silence you protect will one day speak louder than the voice that cursed it." I handed it to Stojan, needing his affirmation. "Tell me that was made by men." He held it for a moment, then shook his head. "I've tried wearing every kind of bishop's ring imaginable, yet nothing has ever burned my hand until that day." Leo took the ring back and stared at it for a moment before saying, "It burns because I was meant to feel it." He placed it on the windowsill where a feather had once rested and just left it there. The next morning the ring was missing, but there was something else. A scrap of paper, creased and torn but clearly folded with care. I opened it, and there were just 8 words scrawled in tiny, steady handwriting. "He did not leave you. My heart sank. I folded that paper in half, then in half again, and tucked it into the lining of my cassock. That evening, I made an unexpected choice. Without any announcement or fanfare, I asked to celebrate Mass in a prison just outside Rome. My secretary was taken aback, but I insisted. "They're the ones who will understand why I need to speak," I told him. Arriving at the prison was surreal. No grand procession, just me in white, entering the stark cement chapel of Rabibia. It felt heavy, as if the weight of sleepless nights clung to me. I didn't preach that day. I simply read the gospel. But at the moment of consecration, something extraordinary happened. In the fourth row, a man serving 2 decades for armed robbery gasped. The host began to glow, not in an overwhelming way, but just enough to make the air around it shimmer like heat rising from asphalt. After Mass, that inmate approached me, visibly shaking. "I saw it. It was fire," he stammered. I didn't argue with him. Instead, I placed a hand on his shoulder and murmured, "You weren't supposed to see me." He blinked, and I could tell he understood. When I returned to the Vatican, I had dust on my shoes and silence in my heart. For 2 days, I didn't speak a word. But on the third day, as I prayed in the chapel, something changed. I was completely still, knees bent, eyes closed, hands open, when I noticed my shadow again. It lifted, stood up, and walked along the wall until it stopped by the crucifix, pointing not at Christ, but at the inscription above him. As I moved closer, the light in the room shifted, not from the candles, but from something behind my shadow. It was like the impression of a figure who had once stood there, a memory lingering in the air. I reached out, and for just a split second, right before the light faded, I felt a warmth wrap around my fingers, not burning but holding me. When the candles flickered back to life, the shadow had vanished, but on the marble floor at the foot of the crucifix, there it was. I remember that night vividly. The ring was still warm and black as I knelt down, gripping it tightly in both hands. I spoke aloud, "Not as a priest, not as a pope, but as a man. If you're still here, then I won't move." The atmosphere was heavy, and the windows of the apostolic palace stayed wide open well into the night. Outside, the guards noted there was no breeze, just a faint rustling noise above, almost like wings circling the Vatican, lingering rather than leaving. For 3 consecutive nights after that, I kept the windows of my private chapel ajar, not to invite the wind, but to reassure whatever force had visited me that night that it was still welcome. Yet nothing came back. No wind, no returning bird. Then something unexpected occurred with the crucifix in the chapel. The image of Christ above the marble altar, identical in every respect to the one I had prayed before when the shadow moved, had always remained silent. Carved in 1835, it had gathered dust and candle smoke over the years, the mahogany frame untouched for decades. But on the first night following my prayer, I noticed a small, fresh crack appear on the top of the crossbeam. The sacristan spotted it the next morning and reported it discreetly. I simply nodded, thinking, "Let it be." By the third night, another crack formed, this time stretching down the beam behind Christ's shoulder. But it was on the fourth morning that something fell onto the altar cloth. It was no piece of plaster or wood. It was a small flake of deep brown paint, almost black, shaped like a fingertip. I took a closer look at it. It carried a faint smell of olive oil mixed with something like ash. I chose not to have it analyzed or to restore the crucifix. Instead, I picked it up, placed it in a small linen pouch, and set it beside the chalice on the altar. That day at noon, I summoned Father Luis Dampos, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a year. He was an unofficial exorcist, navigating the church's margins, working under bishops. I had known him from a mission in Ecuador. We had encountered a chapel there that bled salt water from its walls, and I remembered a woman who spoke fluent Hebrew but had never been to school. When Luis arrived in Rome, he looked at me with surprise. "I thought you'd forgotten me, Holy Father." But I simply met his gaze, my expression serious. "I haven't forgotten anything, least of all the things I wish I could." We spoke in the chapel, and I recounted everything: the ring, the shadow, the voice, and the silence that had enveloped me afterward. I'll never forget that moment with Leo. As he finished his story, a question just slipped out of me. I asked, "Did it ever say your name?" Leo paused for a second, a look of disbelief on his face. "No," he finally replied. I nodded, understanding the weight of that answer. It suggested something deeper, that this wasn't a warning, but a test. "Think of it this way," I said gently. "You're not being tempted, you're being observed." As I spoke, I noticed a shiver run down Leo's spine. The realization struck him hard, and I could see that he was grappling with the enormity of it all. They had prayed together, and during that final blessing something uncanny happened. The crucifix hanging above them gave a soft creak, almost like wood yielding to time. Leo instinctively glanced up and noticed something peculiar. A dark, oily drop had formed below the carving of Christ's right eye. It hung there for a moment before plummeting down to land beside the chalice with a soft pat. Luis, curious as ever, bent down to inspect it. After touching it and giving it a sniff, he looked back at Leo, wide-eyed. "It's not blood," he declared with certainty. "What is it then?" Leo asked, perplexed. Luis replied, "It's a reminder." Then came the pivotal moment. Luis stood up and said, "You need to go to Laredo." Leo blinked, taken aback. "The Holy House?" he asked. "Yes, tonight," Luis affirmed, locking eyes with him, "because the house moved once before, and now it's waiting again." That evening, in complete silence, Leo left the Vatican. No guards, no pomp, just him. He arrived in Laredo shortly after midnight. The basilica doors were closed, but the rector had been discreetly informed. To his relief, the chapel had been unlocked. As he entered the Holy House, a humble stone building believed to have been the Virgin Mary's home, miraculously transported from Nazareth, the atmosphere instantly felt different. Under the glow of flickering candlelight, Leo knelt at the doorway. It felt colder than he remembered. He didn't utter a word, not even a prayer. He simply listened. After about 10 minutes, something shifted in the air. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling of presence. As he turned his head, there it was, just to the left of the small window on the wall, an unmistakable shadow. It wasn't his shadow, and the eerie part was that he hadn't moved at all. This shadow walked across the stone floor, completely out of sync with him, gliding towards the altar in the center before stopping abruptly. Leo felt compelled to rise and follow the shadow's direction. There, tucked beneath the altar cloth, he spotted it, a folded piece of cloth, new and still warm. Curiosity drove him to open it, and within lay a ring. But it was different now. It was clear as crystal and beautifully engraved around the entire rim with the message, "You do not wear the fire, you pass it forward." For the first time in weeks, a tremor coursed through Leo's body, and he knelt down, not to pray, but to wait. Something had transformed inside him. Pope Leo XIV no longer bore his burdens in solitude. He felt a shift that made him ready to relinquish the weight he carried. The crystal ring, significant yet absent from his hand, stayed safely tucked in a small linen pouch. This same pouch also held a fragment of paint from a cracked crucifix. Safe in his inner pocket, close to his heart, these talismans accompanied him everywhere. Back in Rome, he maintained a facade of normalcy. He went through the motions, meeting delegations, posing for photographs, and engaging in routine duties. Yet those around him sensed a subtle change. It was hard to define, but there was a certain gravitas, a quiet air that clung to him, almost like an invisible companion. Nights became a passage to something deeper. Each evening brought the same dream, a familiar setting at the Saxa Sancta, the holy stairway believed to lead from Pontius Pilate's palace. Here, where Christ trod during his passion, the steps took on an ominous quality. Instead of inviting marble, they appeared as gray ash, crumbling beneath him. Each night, as he reached the seventh step, a voice pierced the stillness. "Now look behind you." Each time he turned to find nothing but emptiness. On the third night, drenched in sweat and silence, he resolved to take action. Summoning Father Luis, he felt compelled not to seek counsel, but to issue a command. "Prepare the chapel of St. Sylvester. I need it ready by midnight." Luis didn't hesitate. He bowed and departed. As the clock struck midnight, the chapel glowed with 12 flickering candles, one positioned at each corner and 8 tracing the altar's sides. Leo stepped inside, clad in a simple black cassock, the linen pouch pressed steadfast against his chest. Alone he knelt and made a choice unheard of for a reigning pope. He pulled out a pen and began drafting a resignation. Unfinished and undated, yet signed, he folded the paper and set it beneath the crystal ring resting on the altar. In a whisper he offered, "If you gave this to me for a season, tell me when to stop." Then something strange occurred. The first candle extinguished, snuffed without a breath of wind. A second followed, and then a third, until only one flickered defiantly at the far right of the altar. Its flame danced, leaning toward the center, where it revealed a word etched into the altar's surface, not merely written, but carved as if from deep within the stone. "Still here." Leo watched in silence, the weight of the moment settling around him. The flame flickered, bowed, and then extinguished. As I exited the chapel, I didn't take the ring with me. Yet the following morning it was back in the pouch as if it had never budged. Later in the day, something unexpected happened. My secretary came in holding a letter, a hand-delivered envelope from Kiev, Poland. It was from a Carmelite monastery, containing a note crafted by a cloistered nun I had never encountered. It struck me as astonishing. This nun had never laid eyes on me, confined as she was, yet her words reached me. "Your shadow has reached us." Curiously, there were no questions in her message. She simply mentioned that it had been seen beside the crucifix in their chapel, facing east, indicating Jerusalem. I read the message twice and then flipped the envelope. On the back I found the date March 13th, the very day I had entered the chapel of St. Sylvester. That nun had witnessed my shadow on the same night. I held the letter to my lips, letting a sense of urgency wash over me as I murmured, "Then I need to go." My aides at the Vatican were quick to protest, warning me that traveling to Jerusalem unannounced was perilous and security measures were insufficient. But I couldn't shake my resolve. By the end of that week, I had discreetly coordinated a private pilgrimage with only 3 companions: Father Louise, my secretary, and a local driver from the Latin Patriarchate. We arrived in Jerusalem on a bright Friday morning, free from the press and ecclesiastical garb. Without hesitation, we headed straight to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I walked barefoot, passing vibrant mosaics and sacred altars, until I reached Golgotha, the site where the cross once stood. Kneeling there, in that moment of solitude, no cameras clicked, and no journalists were present. However, a Coptic Christian guard named Samir witnessed something remarkable. He later told his bishop that when I touched my forehead to the stone, the shadow cast behind me didn't reflect my position. Instead, it stood with arms wide, as if being crucified. I blinked, and in an instant, it vanished. That evening I returned to my hotel, and as I opened my breviary, I discovered an unfamiliar slip of paper tucked between the pages. It was devoid of writing, except for the same word I had seen engraved on the altar earlier. That night my dreams returned, revisiting the same steps, the same voice. But this time, when I turned, there was a presence I recognized, though the face was unfamiliar. It spoke to me. "If you leave now, the wall will open." Startled, I woke immediately, lit a candle, and held the ring to its flame. Though it didn't glow, the crystal remained clear. I whispered, "Then I'll stay. Not because I want to, but because you haven't told me to stop." I spent the rest of the night in restless contemplation, waiting for dawn. The moment arrived when the shadow beneath the window seemed to gain a companion. Another identical figure standing still and patient beside it. News of Pope Leo XIV's private pilgrimage to Jerusalem remained well guarded, never gracing the headlines. The visit was orchestrated with meticulous care, a quiet affair shrouded in secrecy. However, silence does not equate to invisibility. In just a matter of days, murmurs began circulating through the church, reaching places seldom seen by outsiders, like a remote monastery carved into the cliffs of the Kadisha Valley in northern Lebanon. There, an elderly Maronite abbot named Elias Barakat, long past his days of public service and nearly deaf, unexpectedly rang the ancient bell of the monastery 3 times. It hadn't sounded in years, stirring the younger monks from their routines. When they burst into the library, they found him overcome with tears, unable to speak. Instead, he pointed to an old manuscript laid open on his desk. The text was a 17th century Maronite writing, largely indecipherable to most. But Father Anthony, the youngest monk among them, attempted a translation. "In the time of the silent fire, the one who walks in shadow shall go to the place of the skull. There the gate will crack but not break, and he shall not enter, only watch." Despite his lack of understanding, Father Anthony could sense the gravity of the words, especially as Abbot Elias repeated one phrase, trembling with emotion. He knelt not at the tomb, but at the cross. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Pope Leo XIV was preparing for his return. The crystal ring he had kept remained cold and clear in his hand, unresponsive until his plane crossed into Italian airspace. In that instant, it pulsed just once, not with warmth but a flicker of light, reminiscent of a lighthouse awakening. Clutching it tightly, he prayed, spending the flight in silent contemplation. Upon arriving at the Vatican, he found a plain note waiting for him in his private quarters. It was simply folded, lacking a signature or seal, containing a single cryptic phrase, "When your shadow touches stone." This puzzled Leo, but deep down he knew someone who could shed light on its meaning. That evening he arranged to meet with Sister Beatrice, who awaited him in the chapel of the archivists, a rarely visited place even by cardinals. As Leo stepped into the chapel, she made no move to rise. Instead, she proclaimed, "You walked where he died." He nodded, though confusion lingered in his heart. Sister Beatrice then opened a leather-bound book resting on her lap. Nestled within its pages was a thin sheet of singed vellum. She slid it across to him, and he examined it closely. The fragment, no wider than 2 inches, bore clear words. "When he kneels in the city of the skull and the second light does not fail, then know the wall is still." As I sat in the dim light of my study, Beatrice turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "This text, it's over 300 years old. It has been waiting for someone to realize its purpose." That caught my attention, and I frowned. "So I passed some sort of test?" She shook her head lightly. "No, it's not that simple. You endured it, and there's a crucial difference." I took a seat beside her, feeling the weight of the moment. For the first time, I reached for the crystal ring I had kept, a mysterious object that had not spoken to me in some time, and placed it gently in front of us. Beatrice stared at the ring, her gaze intense but contemplative. "Do you know what kind of crystal this is?" she asked. I couldn't help but shake my head, a hint of curiosity sparking within me. With a slight smile, she replied, "Neither do I. We tested it. It's no known mineral, neither quartz nor diamond, not even synthetic. It defies explanation." I let out a breath, half in disbelief. "Sounds about right, doesn't it?" Beatrice's hands slipped into her robe, and she pulled out a small envelope, almost as if it held something precious. 3 days ago this arrived at the archive. No return address, but I think it's something you should see." Carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside was a grainy black-and-white photo taken from high above. It captured the Vatican gardens, with the Pope sitting on a bench. But it was the shadow that caught my eye. It stood separate from him, a hand extended towards the apostolic palace, seemingly holding something small and circular. My breath hitched as I turned the photo over and read the handwritten message, "It's following you." Confused, I looked up. Where did this come from? Beatrice's expression turned serious, darkened by something unspoken. "This is the second photo," she said as she revealed another envelope. She pulled out a nearly identical image. Same garden, same bench, yet this time I was alone, devoid of the shadow. Flipping it over, I found more writing. "This is the real one." Staring at both photographs, I couldn't help but question, how do we know which one is true? But Beatrice didn't respond right away. Instead, she handed me a thin, aged slip of paper, its words barely legible, written in pencil. It read, "When the light casts no form, and the form casts light instead, then the wall is not a wall. It's a veil." In that moment, the weight of knowledge pressed down on me as Beatrice closed the book she had been holding. Whatever this was, it was something meant to be hidden away. Later that night, I found myself alone again, the crystal ring resting on the windowsill, shimmering softly in the moonlight. As I gazed at it, I noticed that my shadow on the wall stood utterly still, until, for just one fleeting moment, it raised a hand and pointed west. When morning broke on May 30th, 2025, it felt like any other day. Rome was awakening, pilgrims started gathering, and the basilica glowed beautifully in the early sunlight. Yet deep inside, I knew my world was about to change forever. I woke up that morning before my aides came knocking, but there was something eerie about the atmosphere. The room felt still, almost as if it were being observed, not in the conventional sense, but by the weight of memory. I got out of bed, cleaned up, and dressed without needing help, but when I turned toward the window, I noticed something odd. My shadow, usually following closely behind, stood still. It was faint, lingering even in the early light, like an echo trying to remember how to resonate with sound. I blinked, and just like that the moment faded. Later, I received a delivery, a sealed envelope from Sister Beatrice. Inside there was only a single page, old and crisp, with singed corners. The sentence printed on it felt hauntingly familiar, but not in this manner. He who casts no shadow is either too close to the light or has already entered it. I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my breviary. As the sun set behind the dome of St. Peter's, I decided to visit the Apostolic Chapel. It was just me. No servers, no lights, and most importantly, no ring. That crystal ring, the one that had pulsed with energy, had remained untouched in its velvet case for 2 days. I hadn't worn it since the photograph, but not out of fear. Rather, it felt like a gesture of reverence. Tonight, however, I felt compelled to bring it along. I placed the ring at the altar's foot and knelt beside it, pouring my heart into prayer. If I was only meant to hold it, then take it now. If you have something to say, please speak. If silence is your answer, let it ring louder than thunder. I waited, and in the stillness, nothing happened. No light emerged, no flames flickered, and no shadows danced. I remained there, lost in thought for what felt like an hour, maybe 2. Then, as the midnight bell began to toll, everything shifted. Out of nowhere, a gentle breeze swept through the chapel. The candles leaned toward the altar, drawn by an unseen force. In that flickering light, the crystal ring began to cloud, as if someone were breathing on it from within. I stayed still, watching it closely. The ring pulsed once, then twice, and then a third time before a single crack appeared across its surface, like a bolt of lightning caught in glass. From that fracture, a glimmer of gold emerged. I reached forward, not to take it, but simply to witness. Inside the illuminated crystal, letters began to materialize, not carved or etched, but suspended in some sort of ethereal oil. They formed words I never expected to see. This is not your burden. It was never yours. I whispered to myself, then why give it to me? The response didn't come in words, but rather in an enveloping silence, deeper and more profound than before. In that hush, something stirred. I heard, not aloud but within, my own name, recognized not as a title, but as something intimate and personal. It was a surreal moment. The ring that once held so much significance just dissolved, not like it burned away or melted, but as if it had never existed at all. The gold fragments drifted upwards, disappearing into the dark air. All that was left on the altar was a clean line of ash, stark against the white cloth beneath, a reminder of something profound, like a wound. Curious, I reached out and touched the ash. It was surprisingly warm. With it, I traced the sign of the cross on my forehead. I felt a strange sense of solace, but the next morning came, and I chose not to mention what happened to anyone, neither the Secretariat nor Sister Beatrice, not even in my private journal. Instead, in my study, next to where the ring used to be on display, I wrote a final note. It wasn't a grand statement, just a few words left unsigned and unsealed. I was not chosen to lead with signs. I was chosen to stand where the signs end. That night, while Rome lay in slumber, something peculiar occurred. A page from an ancient ledger slipped free, the same ledger that spoke of Leo XIV nearly a century before I was born. No one was near, and all the windows were closed, yet it fluttered down to the floor. The ink had changed too. Where it once read, "He will be the wall," now it said, "He was." Below, a new addition in the ink, a single word, secreted away in the Vatican gardens. The next morning felt different. I walked alone under the bright sun, my robe shining white. As I turned the corner near the statue of St. Joseph, my shadow was right there with me. No delays, no hesitations, just me, my shadow, and the light, with nothing left to separate us.